Welcome back to the second episode of the Clear Thought Politics podcast, where we critically analyze American politics and culture through the lens of skepticism and reason. There is a huge problem in the United States today. Almost everyone seems to agree on it. National unity is low and political polarization, that is, prejudice against the side that you disagree with, is extremely high. The Republican and Democratic parties are locked in a struggle for power that has become, in my opinion, unacceptably toxic. Congress regularly fails to pass legislation on important matters and has an approval rating with the public that hovers near its all-time low in modern history. Everyday Americans engage in bitter debates with friends and strangers on social media, and everywhere, false information and fake news bombard us at all times. Much of it manufactured outside of our country and spread into the US for insidious political reasons. The collapse of American unity is not occurring in a vacuum. Right now, we're bearing witness to one of the worst global recessions of democracy since the early 20th century. All over the world, powerful countries that were lurching toward democracy in recent decades have slid backwards into authoritarianism. In China, President Xi Jinping just made himself president for life, which I don't think I need to tell you betrays the concept of a president. In Russia, Vladimir Putin has shifted back and forth between president and prime minister for over 20 years in order to avoid the constitutional term limits. And this year his government is removing the term limits altogether. In Turkey, the once great democracy of the Muslim world, President Tayyip Erdogan has cracked down on the free press, embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars, eliminated political rivals, and appropriated an outrageously decadent palace for his own personal residence. In Brazil, the largest and most powerful South American country, President Bolsonaro intimidates federal judges, silences the media, labels his critics as terrorists, and jokes about extermination and genocide of his own people. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán declared an unlimited state of emergency and eliminated many civil rights, suspended Congress, and rewrote the constitution so that his will becomes law without any checks and balances. A related and equally frightening phenomenon is occurring in Western Europe: the rise of anti-Semitism and ultra-nationalism. Jews have been assaulted, their cemeteries have been defaced, and neo-Nazi groups demonstrate openly in the streets. Occasionally, powerful politicians make overtures to these Nazi groups. The swastika has returned to Europe, and with it the same hatred and fear-mongering that threw the entire world into darkness 70 years ago, and very few people are taking this seriously. It's easy to look back on history and see where a country went wrong. The Germans should not have trusted Hitler to ease their suffering due to the Great Depression. The Spanish made more or less the same mistake with Franco, the Italians with Mussolini, the Russians with Stalin. But how easy would it be for you to recognize the collapse of American democracy before it happens? It was only in 1942, when Hitler lost the Battle of Stalingrad, that millions of Germans started to realize that they were on a road to ruin. Those who spoke up in 1936 were called idiots, communists, and traitors. And every single dictator who abolished democracy in modern history did so while simultaneously using the language of freedom and prosperity. On top of all of this, the world is currently engaged in a terrifying debate over what facts are and over what truth is. But enough of the doomsday predictions for now. We'll come back to that. Let's get back to the United States, and let's start by examining a really interesting phenomenon that's occurring right here, right now. This is one of the few occasions in which I'll ask you to actually look at your screen. Have a look at these graphs. These are graphs of approval ratings over time for each American president back to World War II. So we've got Truman, Ike, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush Jr., and Obama. All of the president's approval ratings are compared against Donald Trump's approval. The gray line is for each past president, and the green line is for Trump. What do you see? You've probably noticed that public opinion for each president goes up and down constantly throughout their time in office. Barack Obama's approval rating fluctuated by 20 points. George W. Bush's fluctuated by 60. In fact, W. Bush had the highest and the lowest approval ratings in presidential history at some point in his presidency. At one point, his father, Bush Sr., had an approval rating of 80%, and later it sank down to 28%. The numbers are similar for almost every other president, but not for Donald Trump. For most of his presidency, Trump's approval rating has never moved more than 10 points. He hovers around an average approval of 42% come hell or high water. Through the Mueller investigation, the high-profile resignations and firings in court cases, the coronavirus, the unorthodox public behavior, and through a roaring economy, Trump's needle barely makes a blip. What does this mean? Why is this important? If you ask liberals, they'll tell you that Trump's approval rating never sinks very low because his supporters are brainwashed and they'll never criticize him, much like the supporters of history's cult figures. If you ask conservatives, they'll tell you that Trump's approval rating never rises very high because the mainstream media has corrupted his benevolent public image. I obviously have a personal opinion about this, but regardless of my opinion, here's an indisputable fact. American voters appear to have extraordinarily firm opinions on Trump, in a way that they never have before on any other president in modern history. Scandals and public gaffes and economic booms and global pandemics be damned, none of them appear to have any significant effect on public opinion of Donald Trump. It has been said that Trump could shoot a man on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, and his poll numbers wouldn't budge. How is this possible? Why does virtually no one change their mind about Donald Trump? I could probably write an entire book on this subject alone, but let's try to condense it just for this episode. We'll talk more about it throughout the duration of this podcast as well, but in short, everyone has receded into their own media bubbles. The two political parties have successfully painted each other as a force of evil, and all Americans are more concerned with defeating enemy political leaders than with ensuring the moral decency of their own. It may be a bit early to say that the stage is set for another American Civil War, but as a person who spent 10 years studying history, let me tell you, we are on the road to ruin.